watching the Comm Syndicate live stream.
It's 11:59 on Radio Free America. This is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I've got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall.
We'll do it live. We'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
We're doing it live.
You know, I have a problem with that intro because it says message for brothers and sisters. It says nothing about the non-binaries and genderqueers.
Shit.
Terrence. So maybe you want to check your privilege.
Well, I forgot
next time you're editing
I
stuff.
forgot to include them. Perhaps maybe instead we could just start with a land acknowledgement first, and then I can get into that with the intro. The intro.
I'm glad, I'm
10 minutes.
glad you brought it up so that I don't have to now. But yeah,
Maybe we're just not inclusive.
If you guys want to write the
Obviously.
land acknowledgement, I'll record it and then just have that part of the intro. So.
writing is probably also racist in some capacity. Well, hello everyone.
Goodness, welcome. That's a hell of a way to. I don't think we've started off that way. Well, welcome to the live stream. We've got Jared from 2 Alpha Solutions, and of course Drew from the Terminal Element. And Drew went fishing today.
I did. I had so much fun. So I was trying to go ahead. I caught a couple of rainbow trout, and they're actually decent size. That was pretty exciting. But I was trying to catch bluegill because we have this spring on our property, and every spring it fills with about 2 inches of water and then just breeds mosquitoes and does nothing. It's absolutely miserable. So paid a guy to dig it out, got all the permitting and everything, figured bluegill would be great to go in there to eat the mosquito larvae. And so I caught none of those today, but did get a couple of rainbows. A boat cruised by, and they were catching nothing but like bluegill and crappie and flinging them back. And just, okay, well, we have all summer still.
I saw the size of your fish; that they look pretty sizable. So that looked cool.
So anyway, so we need to do a fishing show.
I was thinking,
fishing live.
Yeah. As soon as I saw you post those pictures, I was like, dude, at the very least we could probably run this show from outside. I know I could.
Yeah.
I've got a Yellow Box Mini, or I could just use one of my laptops, but we can do this and run StreamYard.
Warmer weather's inbound.
It's nice.
There's no reason why we shouldn't be getting shithoused outside while jaw-jacking about radios. And
I agree. Maybe the
slaying
next
fish.
one we do, we'll do that. Jared, how's the weather in your neck of the woods?
It's quite warm here today. It's probably every bit of 90, 95.
Oh,
Holy
yeah,
crap.
That's hotter than here, man.
We have a frost advisory in North Idaho right now. It's cold.
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, it was. We had like 40-degree weather. Oh, that's nice. Yeah,
90 degrees.
Well, we could do. Drew can go fishing. Jared, you could pick a spot, and then I'll find a spot to run the show from. I could probably do it.
You need to go to Fairview Peak and do a live stream from up there.
I don't know if I'd get service there. I'd have to get Starlink, I think, for that
I was
one.
going to say Starlink.
Yeah. I could probably do that. And that'd be a hell of a location to run it from, though. I could probably do like Peavine or something.
One of these days I'm going to make it out there and
All right.
go back up there. I'm going to stop by your house and grab you one day, and we're going to go up there.
I'm ready. I have an AR and I will travel. So, and my radios. But
you have your rifle for when he tries to come to your house and grab you.
Yes.
Is that what I just heard? Okay, just recap. Thank you.
We have a firefight.
Looks like Groundfog says hello. Don't forget to hit the like buttons. Yes, indeed. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you, sir. But anyway, did you want to do? Are we even messing with JS8 Call tonight or no?
I weed whackered my antenna transformer, so we'll be down for a little bit.
Oh.
But we don't have weeds anymore, so.
Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I did a shit ton of yard work today, and so I feel you. But well, I guess we'll get on with the show then. So tonight we're going to be discussing something I think a lot of people rarely think about until it's already failing around them, and that's going to be infrastructure. And it's not just roads, bridges, or power grids, but the everyday systems that quietly hold our civilization together. And most of the time, I think for A lot of people, when they're going about their daily routines, these systems are invisible to us. You wake up in the morning, your phone, GPS, debit cards, internet, all that stuff works because everything appears normal. People assume these systems are permanent, but infrastructure is really only invisible when it's functioning. And the moment it fails, of course, it becomes the only thing that people can think about. And really, one of the recurring patterns that we've seen over and over again, and we've talked about it a lot on this channel and our individual channels as well, but whether it's hurricanes, cyber attacks, blackouts, wildfires, all that stuff, is that communications systems tend to fail early during a crisis. Not necessarily completely, but really enough to create confusion, delays, rumors, and operational paralysis in some situations. And once information becomes unreliable, people start making decisions in uncertainty, and that's usually when things start getting pretty interesting, in my opinion. We're also going to discuss an issue that ties directly into, I guess, this larger conversation. And that's the slow disappearance of institutional knowledge inside amateur radio itself. And Drew and Jared, I'm referring to that that video that we think Kurt or someone shared that in our group chat, basically about the decline of amateur radio and just kind of a summary of the culture. But we'll dig into that, and we'll talk about that because infrastructure is not just equipment; it's also people. And if the people disappear, eventually capability disappears with them. Same for the knowledge. But we'll jump into our first segment. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions people have about infrastructure is they assume it's static. And so, like, once it's built, it exists forever. But of course, modern infrastructure is more like a living ecosystem. It's something that requires maintenance and power, logistics, trained personnel. The internet is a good example, or perhaps even the cellular network. Most people think of their phone as infrastructure, but the phone itself is just a user interface, because behind it exist towers, switching centers, fiber routes, cloud architecture, and of course, power systems. And many of these systems are interdependent. And I think that's kind of important because failure in one area can cascade into multiple others. And I think that's why modern disruptions often feel kind of chaotic fairly quickly. And I think that became obvious during Hurricane Helene. We talked about that on one of the past episodes as well. And when Helene moved through parts of the Southeast, there were widespread power outages, substations went offline, there was flooded infrastructure, collapsed roads, fiber lines went down, pretty much every bad thing that could have happened did. And something that we've repeatedly talked about on this channel happened again, that people lost information before they lost capability. And I think that that's an important point, because the first thing many people lose during a disaster isn't necessarily, food or water. It's going to be situational awareness. For example, they're not going to know if roads are open, fuel's available, which hospitals are still operational, if their family members are safe. And I think once that uncertainty sets in, then rumor fills the vacuum. So that's the setup for this segment. And so we'll jump into our questions. And the first one, and it can be either one of you. Do you think people psychologically mistake convenience for resilience?
Convenience for resilience? I don't think they consider it at all. I don't think your average person cares much about the resilience of their communications network. It's just not on their mind, and it's uncomfortable to think about. It doesn't enter into their mind at all. And Jared, you are muted. You are so fucking muted.
I was gonna sit here and talk to myself. I think they think that they pay for a service and that they're entitled to that service no matter what happens.
So do you think that everyone's just too dependent on all of these systems at this point? Because I mean, the reason I bring this up sometimes is I always come across these people that are really interested at first in communications. You know, they're interested in radios and all that stuff, but don't really put in the work. They don't really put in the effort they need to, you know, mentally to understand a lot of the stuff. And I think that, you know, they just kind of fall back into what they're used to, which is dependence on a lot of centralized systems.
I think
I
a
could
lot
be
of
wrong.
people are used to the instant gratification, so to speak. Back when we were all younger, we didn't have cell phones. We had landlines, and if you didn't answer the phone, you left a message, or if they didn't have anything, you just called back again. You didn't get the instant gratification of somebody picking up or responding to a text message.
That only covers part of the equation, though, Jared. I mean, that same dynamic exists in other aspects of daily life too, like groceries. I mean, grocery stores have been around for a lot longer than cell phones, but we see the same damned thing where there are people who don't have more than a day or two of food in their house. And so it's just, I think it's just so uncomfortable to even think about that grocery store not being open or not having the stuff I want. Even though we've all just here in recent history have been through a situation where groceries were disappearing off the shelves. I was just looking at my photos the other day of 2020. I was snapping photos of inside of a grocery store, and entire aisles empty of stuff. And it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it could have been a lot worse. I mean, nobody starved to death, but had it been even worse.
I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but we
there.
could run into a similar situation with, you know, this whole situation in the Middle East where, you know, the Strait of Hormuz is closed intermittently. And
sure, gas and diesel goes to $9 or $10 a gallon. Like, what are we going to see on the shelves again? I have no idea.
Probably disruptions in the supply chain is my guess. I would imagine something like that would hit during the summer. You know, when it's busy. You know, there's going to be a lot of people wanting to travel. Demand's going to go up. Diesel being over $6 a gallon's pretty bad right now. I mean, can you imagine if it does get up to $8-9? You know, people are going to trucking companies would have to decide if the load that people want them to deliver is even worth it at that point.
Sure. And the cost is going to go way up for that stuff. We already see prices climbing just in everyday items now. It's just, I think it's going to get worse before it gets worse. So we may see that again.
I hope not. I mean, when it happened during COVID, that was pretty rough. Like you said, I mean, I remember going into a couple of the grocery stores here and, like you said, seeing empty shelves. And that was really just because the supply chain was disrupted and they weren't delivering those items. And of course, people were freaking out over toilet paper. But, you know, if things aren't, even if things are resolved in the Middle East, I mean, that's not going to fix any supply chain issues overnight.
No.
Those would probably take like months, maybe even a year or two to resolve before things normalize. So hopefully people don't flip out about gasoline like they did about, I don't know, toilet paper, you know, or oil, or, you know, just synthetic oils. But
well, we were pretty close there with the pandemic. I have a colleague who has 6 kids, and he went to the grocery store to buy eggs, and he was allowed 1 dozen carton of eggs. 1 carton of a dozen eggs, I should say. He's like, I got to feed my kids, right? So he was able to shop around and get more. But had that situation been even worse, like that was probably right on the line of impacting his family. So I think we just saw a glimpse of what could be, and the lesson to take away from that is don't allow ourselves to be so vulnerable to supply disruptions. And I'm sad to say it. I think the percentage of people who actually changed their behaviors and changed their daily pattern in the way their way of life. I don't think the pain was on the par of say the Great Depression, right? You know, where that actually really impacted the behaviors of an entire generation for the rest of their lives. We didn't get that. So people are going to encounter those exact same hardships again here soon, potentially in mass, in large measure.
I hope not. But Jared's getting a shout out. Prepared Citizen says, "What's up, Jared?"
That guy's got food in his house.
We were on the road. Just wanted to say, hey, brother. Maybe he's bringing Jared some food.
He's got
Maybe
food in
that's
his
where
car.
he's on the road to, right?
That's Jay from Prepared Citizens.
Oh, all right.
He's he was at an event up in Ohio this weekend with some of my task force guys and some friends I know up there. I couldn't make it this weekend, but yeah. So if you have any medical needs as far as Fleischmann wraps and tourniquets and medical supplies, go check him out.
Do you have a website?
Yes.
What is it?
preparedcitizens.com, I think.
Oh, all right. Well, that makes
Jay, I want to hear what, if anything, changed for you after going through that pandemic. I'm imagining with a screen name like Prepared Citizen. He did. Give him the link. Get him in here.
He's like, now I'm in a conversation. Well, here's an interesting question that I was thinking about. So, and both of you have worked as first responders, so you could probably answer this, but probably take a minute to think about. But during incidents, whether it's like a natural disaster or what have you, ones that you've responded to. So, you have some FEMA stories, I guess, Drew, but what are examples of infrastructure failures do you think that most citizens never notice happening behind the scenes? So maybe not even something that people necessarily notice, but
goodness, the 911 system goes down with alarming frequency around here.
That's what I was going to say. The 911 system, dispatch system, the fleet of vehicles, everything.
Why do you think that is? Why is it so susceptible to disruption?
It's relying on the telephone system, right? So around here we've got like one fiber optic line that basically handles all of the communications, all of the grid communications, including cellular. So farmer digs that up and it's cut until it's not cut anymore, right? So that impacts things like 911. And you wouldn't notice that. That'd be invisible to you until you need 911. I'm always curious if how many people call during those outages and just can't get through, and what the impact of that is. I don't necessarily see that. That's invisible to me too.
Probably a ton. I was actually researching a lot of that the last few months, but there's some interesting stories. But I mean, I guess from your backgrounds in emergency response, like how quickly have you observed communication problems starting to show up during real world disasters, or just maybe even large incidents?
Jared, I don't want to hog all the time here. I got a lot to say.
Go ahead. I'm looking up stuff for
Prepared Citizen.
So the first thing to break is the human who operates those systems. So when people get overwhelmed, they have to start selecting and prioritizing what they're actually going to deal with. And some people are okay with that. Some people are terrible at that, and you never really find out who's good at it until the shit hits the fan. And so there's some dispatchers that just fall apart, and I don't think they're bad people. It's just they're not given the tools they need, or don't have access to enough staffing to handle some of these things that are just all of a sudden dumped in their lap. And you can't necessarily up staff for all these major types of incidents. So
right.
That would be just prohibitively expensive. I remember Nick from Phil's podcast. I can't remember the name of it.
Matter of Facts podcast.
Matter of Fact. So yeah, he said something that really stuck with me. He said, I've yet to encounter the situation that can't be resolved by just dumping money into it. That's true. But but that money's not necessarily there
Right.
for public safety infrastructure. So yeah, you things
Not
probably work great if you got 8 people on staff at all time for, but our dispatch center has like 1 person, so that person can get overwhelmed pretty quick. So that's the
So
first
when
thing that breaks.
the pressure rises, then that's when the human element starts to degrade.
Yeah, but also just there's only a certain volume that of communication that individual can handle. So we'll see sometimes individual responders, they've got their radios. There's a lot of chatter. Most of it probably isn't relevant to them and what specific compartment of the incident that they're responsible for. And so they're focused on something else. They begin becoming inoculated to all the other chatter. So when something does come upon that background chatter that they've had to tune out in order to focus on a different task, those communications get missed.
So what I'm hearing is you guys actually need an amateur radio operator to serve as net control to compartmentalize all of you guys.
That is funny you mentioned that, because a lot of these folks
I'm
seem
partially
like
joking.
Well, it's funny to me because what it sounds like in a lot of cases, the people who have this romance novel in their mind of leaping in with their ham radio and saving the day, they seem to be like reserve dispatchers, but we don't, there's reserve deputies and stuff like that, right? But I don't really notice reserve dispatchers.
Not
I don't know.
idea, actually. Like a
That'd be fascinating. That would actually be really useful, but I don't know if there's an appetite for that.
That would actually make the most sense in all of this, because a lot of the hang on 1 second. Sorry, let me just, what's this? Okay. I don't want to shit on anybody, like I know that there's
I do. I'll shit on them.
Well, I know there's a lot of people that, talk about like Aries and races and like how much of a role they actually really play. We've covered it, like Hurricane Helene, they were active for that and stuff and contributed in ways. But a lot of that stuff was based on Cold War era thinking. And that thinking was like literally the worst case scenario. If the Soviets bombed us today, if they started tossing nukes, then their thinking back then in the 50s and 60s was, well, yeah, amateur radio would be useful in that situation, and being able
maybe
to
if you're not glowing,
if you're still alive, yeah. I mean, that was the intent, was the people that made it, theoretically, some of them might be, amateur radio people, and they would, be able to help, share information. There's Steve. I can't say Corsair Trainers anymore, which is ingrained in my head, and it's American Gazette. Good afternoon,
Steve, sir. Are we going to continue our fight?
You started a fight.
Put him up. No, it was fun.
What was it?
We have a difference of opinion.
Well, that's not a surprise.
It's so far off topic. So far off topic of what we're talking about here.
No, that's all right. Some. Well, we'll get into it another time, but I mean that was kind of some of the thinking behind some of that stuff, and I don't know that we necessarily have that type of threat today. I mean, I guess it still exists. The chances aren't zero, but that was back in the days when we had like civil defense and stuff, and the government was actively putting measures in place to prepare this, citizenry for a nuclear war, and those communications were part of it. But that was a long time ago. That was like 70 something years ago, and so perhaps maybe it would evolve into like a sort of a backup dispatcher type role.
Maybe, but we three sitting here are young, stout yeomen ourselves, and I don't know if we have the tools to measure how well any of that even worked back then. So I'm always just kind of dubious when people talk about the heyday of amateur radio, and and the civil defense, because I don't know. I don't know if I'm being told stories, bedtime stories here, or if actually it did work really well back then, if they had a solid plan and people were all on the same page, or if it was just the same garbage of
The
attitudes and
stuff that I've read,
prick waving that we see today.
some of it seems legit. Like it was, because I mean, I'm 46. I wasn't alive back then, but from what I've read and researched, a lot of it seems like, it was, some of it seems to have been SOP that was kind of baked into civil defense, which I buy that. But, your example that you gave about the one dispatcher that's super, stressed when pressure rises, who actually has real training, knows what they're doing, knows what to expect. I'm sure they've trained them for certain things in that role. If you're an amateur radio operator, you're not necessarily trained for that kind of stress. So I don't know that you could really slot someone in unless you were just, one cool customer.
I mean, there's a whole training evolution to get somebody even.
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at 6 months to a year to make them even somewhat effective.
Well, to that point, if you went on like ZipRecruiter right now and looked for a dispatcher job, and you're like, yeah, I'm really good with radios and I can even fix them. And I can tell you all about radio and propagation, all that stuff. I can tell you all about LMR, all those things, but that doesn't mean I can do that job.
No, they're not techs. There's
Doesn't mean I'm
outside
qualified.
Companies that they hire to do all their technical work. Sure.
Have either of you ever seen situations where like information confusion created more problems than the actual disaster itself? So like during
that's a weird question.
Well, like, I don't know. We often talk about things in terms of a lack of communication.
COVID-19, yes. COVID-19. Total bullshit communication failures. People straight up fucking lying. And yes, that caused more problems than if we were all just sanely, cogently, like adult people, were able to just make a risk analysis and decisions based on that risk analysis on our own. Yes. Okay.
Is there anything that you think people consistently overestimate about emergency response capabilities during large-scale incidents? Like, do people think that, when something happens that you're going to show up within 5 minutes?
Oh, even on small-scale incidents. A power outage. There's a certain number of people who are...
Thing.
Yeah. So to power outage, there's people who are like oxygen dependent, right? People with lung disease, COPD, lung cancer, things affecting the lungs chronically, and they need oxygen. Well, typically you would have a certain amount of just pressurized oxygen tanks on hand, and that gets you through the power outage typically. There's a certain number of people that don't even deal with that.
Really?
So like the expectation is like, we're just going to come out and give them oxygen or take them to the hospital, and they just live there and breathe their oxygen until the expectation is really weird. It's puzzling to me. Like, you'd think the person who needs oxygen, supplemental oxygen to survive, would be the most motivated person to ensure that they have a backup. But the expectation is they just
if I relied on oxygen, I would definitely be very motivated to make sure that I had it if there was a power outage, or, what's up, Groundfog? I see you in the comments. Hope all's well.
Medical grade oxygen, Drew, and is that a prescription based?
Yes, I do know that, it's the same oxygen as like for welding, but I think it's all, what makes it medical grade is the cleanliness of the tanks.
Right.
How well the tanks are cleaned out, if they've ever had.
You're not going to get a prescription that allows you to have 10 or 20 tanks of oxygen.
That's actually pretty normal to have that. So the medical supply company that comes out and brings a person their oxygen concentrator that plugs into the wall is also going to be supplying like a battery powered backup unit, or one that they would take to the grocery store, right? And then also most of those places will drop off like 48 or 72 hours worth of tanks as well. That's all baked into that same prescription. So for a person not to have that, I just wonder where that breaks down. And so that's what comes to mind when you talk about the, people's expectations of the 911 system. I cannot bring out, I can't spare 10 days worth of oxygen supply for, a dozen people.
Right.
Like, you got to have a backup. The government and 911 system can't do that for you.
Well, before we jump into our next segment, I guess I have some questions that I'll throw out there to the audience, and you guys can answer them in the chat if you want to. But if your internet and cellular service both disappeared tonight, what would your immediate plan be? So that's the first one. The next would be, do you think that modern infrastructure is more resilient or more fragile than it was 30 years ago? And have any of you personally experienced a major communications outage? And finally, how many of you have an actual communications backup plan if your cellular service does go down? But with that, we'll move into our next one. And this has more to do about people kind of losing information during a disaster. But one thing I've noticed repeatedly after disasters is that communication degradation creates psychological stress very quickly. I think your example about the dispatcher was a good one, because that's something that you probably see on your end listening to calls, but there's, a whole different set of just kind of a psychological stress going on the, end of the people making those calls. But even partial outages, those seem to create confusion. You may still have intermittent cell service or partial internet, but unreliable communications can actually create more uncertainty than probably no communications at all, because now people begin second guessing whether their messages are getting through, whether information is accurate, or perhaps whether systems are even functioning normally. During Hurricane Katrina, there were rumors spreading about violence, attacks, gangs, infrastructure failures, and other claims that were probably very difficult to verify in real time. I'm sure, Drew, you probably heard some of those while you were on site there.
Yeah.
You had some. Was it a rumor about the dogs, which is why they gave you the flashlight? It was a rumor about dogs attacking people, but that didn't end up being true, right?
I was not attacked. I did not get an opportunity to test out my dogfighting, my FEMA
your
issued
dogfighting
weapons. No, but yeah, so they're telling me this. People are coming back and saying there's packs of roving wild dogs eating people. Well, okay. I have no idea. I have no way to verify if that's true, or if it has a shred of truth, or if it's completely fabricated. I do not possess the tools to verify that stuff remotely. Now, if it were today and people have Twitter over satellite and satellite texting now, maybe that would be a little easier to get online and verify or test. But in 2025, that didn't exist.
Did you?
We had MySpace. You had
when
MySpace
you were
too. Don't lie.
Did you go to?
Were you a friend of Tom?
We all were, but that guy's an interesting dude, by the way. I don't know if you've ever read about him, but you should. When that dude was, total sidebar here, supposedly when that dude was like 14, he was involved in I think the biggest FBI raid in U.S. history. When he was 14, he was hacking into Chase Manhattan Bank and shit.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and I believe they raided his house or something over it. But then he ends up creating MySpace later on, and I think after he sold it, he allegedly the rumor is that he just takes he does photography or something. But anyway, sorry, got on a tangent. But did you, when you were deployed, and you went into different areas that were cut off, their communication was cut off from each other? Did different areas have their own rumors? Did you ever notice, or
I can't answer that because they did not send me into any real shit, and I thought that was unfortunate. We're talking about the lowest functioning human beings on the planet. So one lady, she was large, obese, type 2 diabetic, insulin dependent. They sent her to the fucking Tentsville in New Orleans, and had to buy a generator and a mini fridge for her insulin, and like you know, so they sent her. I was like 20 years old and an EMT, and you know, I was like, I wanted to go and get in some shit, see some stuff, help some people, and they put us up in like the Jacksonville, Hampton, with free beer on Monday and Wednesdays. It was just a total waste of resources. Gig. Just yeah, I mean, I can't complain. I made money, but it was just stupid. So I think we didn't get to help anyone.
I think it's fascinating about how rumors start and spread, and if some of them kind of remain localized. I mean, similarly, you know, after Helene, you know, there was widespread rumors involving FEMA response and the way that they were conducting aid distribution, if I remember correctly. But I mean, and to be fair, you know, some rumors are true. You know, sometimes they're even partially true, and sometimes they're entirely fabricated. You know, maybe someone got bit by a dog during Katrina, and then you know that evolved into it was a pack of dogs.
I'm really more afraid of the naked people in Florida. Have you seen these people?
No.
Just like answer the door naked, just straight up, like that's normal behavior. That's terrifying to me.
Who do we know from Florida to verify this? We could see if
like
prepared.
Steve's basically a Florida man, but he lives in California, so that won't work.
Walks around naked. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of that one about
Prepared Citizen. Jay from Prepared Citizens is in Alabama. He might be able to verify.
That's Florida adjacent. Yeah.
Yeah.
If we could get some boots on the ground, some ground truth, is that the Aries word? So if you could share some ground truth with us, it'd be appreciated.
I learned a new term now, ground truth. Wow.
I thought that's what they call it. Anyway,
I'm gonna have to write that down and remember it and annoy people with it. But
fucking people, because we had to go door to door and like, hey, call 1-800-521 FEMA or whatever if like a tree fell in your swimming pool and you want government money for it. They just answer the door butt naked with their wieners hanging out. Like, what are you fucking doing? But I know it's hot down here.
You from being there?
Yeah, I mean it worked.
Yeah, I mean I would leave.
That's effective. Yeah, no, you're right. That's legit.
But you know, in degraded communications environments, you know, I'd imagine, you know, communication and verification becomes pretty difficult. And that's where I think infrastructure fragility kind of intersects with the human behavior that we're talking about, because, you know, people don't really, I don't think they handle uncertainty very well. Katrina was a pretty good example of that. You know, modern society is just so heavily dependent on real-time information systems. I think that was even kind of true back then, you know, because we were really using the internet pretty heavily then too, you know, and people really are accustomed to instant updates and their GPS and just immediate communication. But, you know, once those systems become degraded, you know, even temporarily, people often realize they have no real independent means of gathering information. And I kind of think that's where amateur radio still has some relevance. You know, not because it's magic or because it's going to save the world or any of that, but, you know, it really does provide you some communications independence. You know,
let me argue with you.
Sure.
Let me argue with you. Everybody here has a radio in their car for getting information. So I hear that. I hear that. Like, I need amateur radio to get information. Like, well, okay, yeah, sure. Information can be shared over that, but I think we're tripping over a really obvious answer.
The part where I would push back is that it's my own personal philosophy. I try and use a layered approach to my communication. So the radio in my car is just one part of that layer. My HF rig is another. My handheld's another. Like all like my scanner, for instance, is another. You know, like those are all things that are part of my ecosystem. So, but to your point, you know, am I going to jump on HF to hear the local news? No. I'm going to listen to maybe short.
If you want government sanctioned propaganda, your AM/FM radio is where you want to go.
Right.
If you want more something more regional or local, then
then
you might want to talk to your buddy 20 miles away on GMRS or amateur radio or whatever.
So some shithead 20 miles away, ham radio operator who looks like he ate a basketball without chewing it. He's got access to good information that's not government propaganda, right? So okay, I'm being glib here. But my issue with
you
that.
might be able to tell me that the main road between my city, my town, and the next town over is open or closed or
Okay, yeah.
Something like that.
I'm not arguing with it.
That's a good point because, again,
You're not going to get that from a government issued news statement.
Why wouldn't they list road outages? That's not like something they would need to lie about.
They may not list them at all, but they might just say, "Hey, there's such and such going on over in this area. Stay away," or whatever. Or there's a warming shelter set up over here. Stuff like that. That's what you're going to get from government sanctioned stuff.
So if the other person on the other end of the radio has access to information, then I see value in that. But 1,000 people without access to information is still not information.
Information.
So,
myself.
But you wouldn't, if those people you're talking to don't have access to any greater information than you have, is what I'm saying. And so I hear that argument a lot. I need my JS8 call to get information in the apocalypse. But unless you're talking to somebody who has access to good information that you don't have access to yourself, I don't see the justification of that. And I'm not arguing that people shouldn't have HF and radio capability or amateur licenses or anything. Sure. I'm not arguing that. But what I do want to cause people to do is critically think about these claims that are made.
But if I don't have my man pack, how am I going to call in a QRF? I need that.
I have no fucking idea what that is.
That quick reaction force to come in or medevac me out. I mean, they're gonna. I have to call a medevac.
Sounds like a queef.
I think that. I mean, I get the point. There's a lot of people out there who are into the fantasy. I get it. And it's probably pretty normal to come to that conclusion, but that's not what that stuff's for. At least I don't think it is. I have a very practical approach to it. I mean, Steve brings up a good point here in the comment section. He said lots of people used to have CB radios, and you never see them anymore. And that's true. I think CB radio is probably still alive, maybe with like off-roaders. I've got one in my Jeep, but I don't talk on it really. I don't know the last time that I've talked on my CB, but I have it in there because I listen to a lot of the truckers. Some of them share pretty good information when I'm driving about road conditions that I don't.
So that guy has access to info. That's good.
Well, like if a truck, what I'm saying is like if you've got some truck drivers that are stopped on the interstate because there's a horrible accident or something's going on. Let's say there's a hazmat spill, whatever. Maybe, and again, it's the luck of the draw. Do you happen to be listening to CB and are you on that frequency? And there's a lot of variables, sure. But, sometimes you might pick up a nugget just from monitoring. Not all this stuff is really talking on your radio. A lot of it's just listening. I listen more than I talk on mine, just to see what I can hear. So maybe if you do have a CB, maybe you might pick something up locally. But that's the point, is to have, a few different systems. But I agree with you that, there's too many people that live in the fantasy of Red Dawn or whatever it is, that they think that suddenly if something happens that all these things are going to be an integral part of how they respond. And that's not reality, I don't think.
It's an unreasonable expectation.
It is. Especially if you don't train with your equipment.
Fair.
I mean, like if an intruder kicked in your door and you never practice with your pistol, it just sits in a drawer, how effective do you think you're going to be with it? Same for radio, like you were talking about potentially having like a backup dispatcher. That's a fascinating idea. I think probably could be a practical one, but you know, those people would also have to train. They'd have to practice. They'd have to practice with their equipment. They would have to read and reread during the boring times what the SOP is, and just spend all their time being, you know, not all their time, but a lot of time being just prepared in case something were to happen. And people don't normally do that with their radios. That's why I was making that comment earlier that, like, I see a lot of people all the time that are interested in it, but that interest usually wanes after a week or a month or a year. But
Or they get it and they throw it in the drawer after the first week and put it on the shelf, and it's never used ever again.
yeah, and everyone kind of relies on social media nowadays anyway. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think social media actually helps situational awareness with natural disasters, or, you know, do you think it just makes things worse? Because that seems to be like X, for example. That seems to be where a lot of people get their news now, unfortunately.
You will not find faster information about some developing world event than on X.
Yeah.
Call that unpopular, but that's where the information comes out first. So I think for breaking info, that's great. For calm, reasoned response to that information and a sane risk analysis so that decisions can be made pursuant, not X, certainly not. That's where things break down.
Big Will Ballin's got a comment. In a movie scenario, amateur radio was used to get info from outside the region or country that was unavailable locally due to apocalypse. Would regional HF comms be realistic for this, or mainly hype? You know, I mean, there's a little bit of grain of truth probably to everything. We've talked a lot about in past episodes about, like, Iran, for instance, you know, when they would throttle, and like they did it just a few months ago, they throttled the internet, they throttled Starlink, you know, all in an effort. And that wasn't an apocalypse. That was in an effort to censor their population, to keep information from getting out. Some amateur radio operators, and it's rumored that there's maybe only a handful of licensed operators in Iran. I don't know that anyone really knows, because there's no real documentation to back that up. But to your question, you know, could you use regional comms for any kind of realistic scenario where there was a large information outage? Sure. You know, during the Arab Spring, people were scrambling to figure out how to share information. You know, they were using, in the aftermath, they were, you know, decided like Tor and mesh networks and stuff like that were even options. But yeah, it's possible. But I mean,
I think there's a few examples. I can point to a couple examples.
Sure.
One was I covered a video on it on my channel. There's a fellow in New Caledonia who is a ham radio operator. He used JSA call with like I think it was a USDX, some QRP radio. Maybe it was a QMX. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He was on 10 meter JSA call and talking to people over in Australia when they had their outages, when they had their civil unrest, there's riots. And he said, like, you know, the country had just been devastated by these riots, and he was terrified to even talk on the radio. But, you know, in the end, the rioters didn't have the ability to DF him and figure out who he is or what he was saying. So it brought him great comfort. And I think also if he did need evacuation from the French government and he couldn't call by traditional means, that would have been possible. So that's a case where the person he is talking to would have the access that he needs, the outside information and the ability to relay a message to the French government or something, to, you know, that there's people in distress there. So this is where I'm saying, like, it's all about who you're talking to. So if I'm worried about the Iranians, you know, chopping my head off because I'm talking on the ham radio to get information or giving information, you know, that's probably not as permissive of an environment as that fellow found himself in. Or if we're worried about government propaganda and nobody in the government is leaking good information, I don't know. I think we just need to have we need to have realistic expectations of what we can expect out of these modes of communication.
I think that's fair.
Otherwise, we're just deluding ourselves. So
well,
have the capability, get the capability. Everybody should have more tools than they need. I like way more tools in my toolbox than I'll ever use, but let's be real about what we can expect out of this thing so that we don't make stupid decisions.
That is a fair point. S. Brown Outdoors goes back to building your own community first and being able to communicate with your community that you established. I agree with that.
Heck yes.
I think building, community, not online, not, with people thousands of miles away, but people that you actually really do talk to, that you can rely on, share information, even just in person, locally with, possibly trade services, maybe. I think that's, certainly something that people seem to forget about. I've talked before about people that don't even know their neighbors. So if something were to happen, it'd probably be pretty helpful to, at least know the guy or gal that lives, next door or across the street from you. This is
you brought up a great point that's a form of infrastructure.
Yes. Yeah, it is. I think it is.
It's a unignorable form of infrastructure. It has to exist.
Yeah.
It's very basic form.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can even distill it down to, live drops and dead drops. And, those are very basic forms of communication, but that's infrastructure. That's you don't always need a radio to communicate, but I don't know. I mean, with, you're talking about trying to verify who you're talking to on the other end, for instance. How do you, either of you really, if you were in that situation, how would you personally determine whether information is actionable during a chaotic event?
How do you determine it now, right? Same skills.
I think that's fair. I guess you probably wouldn't do anything different now than perhaps in that situation. I think.
Okay, so if I tell you on this live stream,
paranoia would be greater.
I got that down pat. If I tell you on this live stream, Spokane just got nuked, run for your life. Okay, I mean, it looks like a nuclear wasteland anyway, but you're going to have to apply some discernment to what I just said. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but if I also told you that on JSA call, I guess depending on the context and who's telling you, like that's a tough one to make decisions without some sort of video, photo evidence, some sort of like tertiary report verifying what I just said. I think it's the same skill, just maybe a little bit more difficult to scrape together that information to verify those claims.
You also have to determine if information is being put out third-party wise or if it's first-hand knowledge. If you're getting one first-hand knowledge and a bunch of third-party reports, that's not going to weigh as much as a bunch of first-hand reports either.
Right. Yeah, using discernment with what's coming in and, is it a first-hand account, and trying to determine if it's rumor or not. Sometimes those can be difficult, I would imagine. But questions for the audience, and then we'll wrap up this segment. So during emergencies, where do you guys primarily get your information from? Is it sure? Is it X? Is it, Facebook? I mean, speaking of, Facebook's sometimes helpful. Sometimes we learn about local fires from some of the local Facebook groups before we hear it on the news. Not my preferred outlet of news and information, but usually the people reporting that stuff, it's pretty accurate, and it's good to know if there's a fire nearby, because then you need to start paying attention to official news reports as to whether you need to evacuate or not, for instance. So that's one. Have you guys ever witnessed rumors spreading through a disaster or emergency event? And do you think people today are psychologically dependent on constant information access? So let's see. American Gazette. So Steve says, we got apps on the phone that work good. Yeah, I have I forget what it's called. It's a fire app, and I can't tell you the name of it off the top of my head.
Is it Watch Duty?
It is Watch Duty. Yes, thank you.
Watch Duty is a great one. That's got all that INCI web Web information,
Yeah.
or whatever the hell it's called now.
That is a good one. I drew a blank on that one, but no, WatchDuty is a good one. Usually if I hear a rumor about something like that, I'll go look at the app and then, try and figure out if anyone's reporting it or not. But we'll move into our next segment. So this one's about cellular dependency. So another thing that I guess kind of concerns me about our modern communications infrastructure is how many people don't really realize how much internet traffic may pass through relatively small numbers of backbone routes. For example, if there's damage to a switching center, or a data center or a power node somewhere, then suddenly large regions can experience degraded connectivity. And we've also seen examples where emergency systems themselves become overloaded. You mentioned 911 systems earlier. That's a great example. And certainly they go down for various reasons. And people often assume, if I can't reach anyone, I'm just going to call 911. But during a widespread emergency, everyone else is really trying to do the same thing. And you mentioned that, those are the calls that you don't hear. That's the stuff that you don't see, is people desperately trying to call 911. And all of those people doing that at the same time, having the same idea, that can create congestion, and congestion itself becomes a form of infrastructure failure. And, the same is true when the cell systems go down, and even if towers are surviving physically, they only have a finite amount of bandwidth. And if too many users attempt simultaneous access, then, calls will fail, messages will be delayed, and your data can become intermittent. And again, that reinforces the point that communication systems fail progressively, not necessarily catastrophically. And I think a lot of people tend to have this kind of, idea that, when something does kick off, that it's all going to be at once. And that may not necessarily be the case, because I think that, progressive degradation can be, also something that's maybe psychologically difficult for people to interpret. And so I guess one of the first questions for this segment would be, if a regional cellular outage lasted, let's say, several days to a week, what secondary effects do you think people would notice first? What do you think the initial fallout from that would be? Because people are pretty dependent on their cell phones. How long do you think it would take them to notice that, this was an unusual event?
You're going to have to repeat all this after Jared's done pooping.
Is that where he went? Or did he let his dog out?
Oh, we should ask him when he gets back. Number 1 or number 2, Jared? Okay. Well, I mean, this is a big hypothetical, but that doesn't necessarily mean that number 3. Oh God. I don't want to ask.
That's I think he vomited.
That's not the only modern form of communication is cellular. There's like a lot of communication that happens over data connections too. So if the cell's down, but people still got their fiber at home. So I'm not really certain how to go about that hypothetical, unless we want to say like all terrestrial communications down in this regional hypothetical disaster.
So where both of you live, like, are the communities kind of spread out?
Yes.
Like by
dozens of miles.
Dozens of miles. How about you, Jared?
Yeah, I would say yes, but it's all. I don't think I'm as remote as Drew is, but we're very rural here, though, too. But there's also a lot of
liberals.
Yeah, a lot of them too. There's a lot of residential in between the towns, but it's all spread out.
So if you were to, I mean, I'm sure you guys drive past these communities frequently, and do you ever notice anyone setting up any kind of redundancy systems? Do any of them have any, like if the cell service went down for an extended period of time, whatever that is, let's say it's weeks, days, months, months, I guess, would be kind of crazy. But do any of them have any kind of meaningful communications redundancy, whether it's a GMRS repeater that's, for the community or something comparable?
I mean, we have repeaters here. GMRS are pretty much privatized. The amateur repeaters are club owned.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as redundancy, they might last a couple days.
Well, that's the other thing too, is if something were to happen, you need to be able to run it off some sort of backup power supply, whatever that is. I guess it could be a generator or solar generator, or
I think it's so far and few between that it wouldn't have any great effect around here.
How about you, Drew? Any of those communities have backup communications?
Yeah, so like government sanctioned stuff. The emergency manager, great guy in our county here, he has facilitated a GMRS repeater. I think a couple. They've got at least one that I'm aware of, but I think they've got a few more. But anyway, they recently opened it up to everyone, right? So they had it just maintained for cert, and they weren't listing it, but then they realized, we're not going to know when something goes wrong. This thing isn't being continuously tested as if it would be if we open it up to everybody to use. So that is a government sanctioned form of backup communication. Now, I don't know what percentage of human beings around here have a GMRS license or would know how to use that. The remainder of backup communications would be either amateur radio or satellite units that people have, or some the 900 megahertz mesh between Meshtastic, Meshcore, and Reticulum. That hasn't been like standardized. That hasn't reached a standard in my area. I'm aware of the Cascadia mesh over in Oregon, Washington, and BC, up the Pacific Northwest. There might have even reached down into California, but they've done a pretty good job just as a grassroots movement, creating a fairly resilient, widespread network of mesh core repeaters. And so, like, one guy lives in Southern Oregon, and he was talking to people in British Columbia, totally off grid. Wild to me, but I think that's so cool.
It is cool. Yeah.
The emergency manager, also a great guy in the county where I work, one county up, he is looking at potentially trying to get some funding to create a mesh network in that area, and he would have the access to get some really sweet repeater locations for something like that. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow, but it as it is currently very compartmentalized, not really a regional standard.
The two things
then the percentage of people still who would care to have that type of forward thinking is probably single digits or less.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Like next weekend, I have to lower my tower to do some antenna maintenance. And one of the local ham guys, he's a new ham, he's a young kid, he just graduated high school this year. I offered him a spot on my tower to put a mesh core repeater on, because I have a pretty tall repeater, and that's a very localized mesh core area, but it's going to give them on my tower. It's going to give them a huge range, because I'm 100 feet tall. My tower is.
Oh wow! Yeah.
And it's going to be all solar, solar powered and everything. So there'll be a little solar panel up there along with the mesh core repeater.
That does. So you mentioned Starlink and mesh seem to be the two things that a lot of people are starting to gravitate towards now for like a backup communication system. You and I, Drew, had talked about Starlinks and the positives and the pitfalls and all that stuff. But,
sure.
I think that, the positives probably outweigh the negative. We
are stepping into the era of satellite from your mobile phone to T-Mobile's T Satellite. I think is their service. You don't even have to be a T-Mobile customer to pay $10 a month and get that on your cell phone or your compatible cell phone on a different network. So,
but I mean, even satellite networks, those can still experience congestion.
Sure.
And they are dependent on units on the ground relaying information. So that's
Yeah, nothing's bulletproof. This is why we
yeah,
need layers.
and absolutely, but I think you're right. I think that as we enter the era for satellite communication on your phone, that's going to change a lot of things. That's something that I would go for, even if it was a little
Absolutely.
extra. I'd pay for that on my smartphone, sure. And then the mesh stuff. There's a couple of people locally that I talk to sometimes, and they're like really interested in it. And so I'm like, oh, maybe I'll. I was thinking about putting a solar powered one up on the mast that I've got on my roof, because that would provide pretty decent coverage. But
Gosh, you are really just like taking that freedom from not having an HOA anymore and just like
God,
taking full advantage of it.
I hated it. So that was the first thing I did when I moved into this house is I started running all of my cables, putting up my antennas, and just going crazy. Because my previous house, because of our HOA, the rules were that you can't have an antenna higher than the peak of your roof.
Is that the base of the antenna or the top of the antenna?
The top. So if I'm standing from the street looking at your house and I see an antenna, I'm going to write you a nasty letter about how you can't do that. Or at least that's what the HOA would do. So I hid my HF antenna in the attic, and then I still had my repeater antennas up, but they were just lower than the peak of the roof, which sucked, But yeah, now I've broken those chains, and I am a free man now. But questions for the audience: have any of you ever experienced a cellular outage where you realized how dependent you were on your phone? How about what systems in your daily life would immediately stop functioning without internet access? And do you think that society is becoming too centralized on this technology? So now we move into our next one. And so this one's going to be about that video that we all watched. Did you watch it too, Jared? I thought you did. Andrew.
Which one was it?
It was the one where it was talking about how
ham radio is just for old white guys.
Well, yeah, like most of the hams are older now, and there's no one to replace them.
Look like they swallowed a watermelon.
I think I did. I've been so busy with work this past couple weeks. I don't think I watched it. If I did, I don't remember it.
Well, I think that's an interesting one, but it was probably, I think it was like a 30-minute video or something like that.
It was a good video.
It was, because it actually touched on quite a few things that I've talked about in past videos that you guys talk about as well in the past. And I think that a lot of people don't really pay attention to it anymore. People are kind of focused on all the ham FUD stuff. But if you really start looking at the demographics, you realize that a lot of the things in that video are true, that there's really no one to replace a lot of these guys. It really is the disappearing ham generation, and I think it kind of strikes at the heart of amateur radio culture itself, because the one thing I think people are failing to recognize is that the people who built much of this communications culture, just like the video said, are aging out. At the turn of the 20th century, amateur radio operators, they were building pretty crude transmitters in garages and basements. You had professional telegraphers mocking them, calling them hams, and then of course that name stuck. It was originally a pejorative, but over time, a lot of these operators, they built relay networks, and they experimented with shortwave propagation and survived federal radio bans, and they some of them actually even contributed during the wartime, and some helped establish many of the communications traditions that exist today. And the thing about it is that that demographic looks very different now. The average ham radio operator is now somewhere in their 70s, and there really doesn't appear to be a large youth movement replacing them. And to be fair, there's younger people entering amateur radio, but I don't think it's at the scale needed to replace the institutional knowledge that's gradually disappearing. And I think that matters because amateur radio is really more than frequencies and equipment. It's mentorship, operational knowledge. You brought this up a minute ago. Local repeater maintenance. The government opening up a GMRS repeater because they want to make sure it's still functioning and they don't have someone to constantly monitor it and service it and check to see if it's alive. So that makes sense. It's also about propagation knowledge and antenna building and decades of accumulated experience. And that knowledge is infrastructure too. And I think this creates an uncomfortable question. What happens when the people maintaining decentralized communications capability all disappear? Especially in a society that, that's becoming, as we noted, increasingly dependent on centralized digital systems.
I think a lot of the younger people, no, there's not as many as there once was, but I think their interests are more spread out. They're not necessarily interested in voice communications so much. Just like with this kid that's coming over to put this mesh core system on my tower next week. Yeah, he does voice.
How old is that kid? How old is this person you're calling a kid?
18. He just literally graduated high school.
He's a young man.
Oh, he's young, 35, going bald. That young buck.
You're just a baby. You're a spring chicken.
But I think their interests are, I guess, diluted away from amateur radio a little bit, but it's still including it somewhat though too.
Right.
I mean, there's so many more aspects to it now than there were 20 years ago.
Well, look at all the digital. There's like a new digital mode every
exactly.
Month. I'm exaggerating, of course, but it certainly feels that way. But if you look at the list of all the digital modes out there, it's a lot. You didn't have that, not that long ago.
No, and
DMR is not that old.
The ones that were there, digital modes, were unobtainable due to cost, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
For the average, especially the younger kids. I never got into any of that stuff when I was a kid because it was expensive.
The barrier to entry for amateur radio, I think, was higher back when I first really got interested in it, back when I was like, 18, 19. And I didn't get into it right away. I was into like CB. But now I think it's probably a little bit easier now than it was. Like you don't have to do Morse code anymore. That lowers the barrier.
Yeah, I got my license. I got my license in '94. I opted to go for what they had at the time was a no-code tech license.
Oh, I didn't know that you could do that.
Yeah, so I didn't have to do the Morse code. Now to get my general,
you appliance operator, you
right?
You're not a real ham.
Now at the time to get your general and your advanced and your extra, you had to have Morse code.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. Yeah,
but so I was.
Staying
as a tech at the time.
I'm interested in Morse code. I started to study it and then I stopped because
I don't have the bandwidth to sit there for more than 5 minutes to study at the moment.
I'm not naturally curious about it. I got to be like, if I'm naturally curious about something, I will start that project tonight and finish it in 48 hours because I'm driven to do it. But if I'm not feeling it, it might take me months or never. And it's one of those things. I'm just not interested in it. Like I like JS8 call, but that's really the only digital mode I mess with. I don't have time for the learning curve for the other 100 that are out there. I just don't.
I do JS8 and I don't even hardly do that. I do FT8 when I'm really, really bored because it's mindless. It's just like doom scrolling.
Well, like that other one, Vara AC or whatever the hell it's called. Like,
Yeah, I have that.
I checked that out. I downloaded it. I started messing with it, and then
Yep.
I'm like, I don't have time for this.
Right. I got WinLink.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. It's there if I need it. I can fumble my way through it if I have to, I think.
Well, one thing that I also found kind of fascinating about that video, just kind of the historical discussion surrounding amateur radio, is that the hobby also survived, wartime shutdowns, spectrum restrictions, government regulations. And, the thing that may ultimately threaten amateur radio the most really is potentially demographic decline and cultural irrelevance. And I think that's interesting that it survived all of these other things, but maybe the one thing that takes it down really is just the culture.
I think we need to look at the motivations of people, younger folks who are wanting. What are they wanting? What are their motivations? So I can tell you, when I got my amateur radio license, I was like 29 or 30. My wife was in her mid to late 20s. So I think we were, fairly young, relatively speaking, according to the demographics of that video when we got licensed. And our goal was to talk to each other together, right? So it was not to talk to randos on HF,
right,
who want to lecture me about this or that. And and she a guy even got on and was nasty to her about something or other. So we weren't wanting to talk to those folks. And so I think this goes back to something Scott said about your community. So if I had to guess, just based on my own experience, we're wanting to talk to our community. We weren't wanting to talk to random assholes outside of our community. And so where I see a decline in interest in amateur radio is in that respect, because the regulatory aspect of amateur radio is not kept up with those desires. So why the hell can we not encrypt to talk privately to each other? I mean, we could still ID in the clear, whatever, if that oversight's really needed, but I don't want to talk to random assholes. I want to talk to my wife. Go ahead.
The whole encryption thing's a national security thing.
That's bullshit. Not you. That's bullshit.
Well, I mean, but
national security. Terrorists do not talk to each other over Bowfangs. They talk over Signal or WhatsApp or Telegram or video game chats.
The context is that stuff's going back to like World War I and World War II.
Okay, so that's my point. Is this shit is stuck in the past. And so if we're wondering like why on earth would people today, younger people today, not be interested? It's
could you get on
because
radio
it's irrelevant.
You could get on radio teletype and start sending one-time pads.
It would be unlawful, and people would come. People would chew us out and come visit us and DF our house.
Well,
and,
but you were saying a minute
ago,
like terrorists aren't going to do that. Like that is a.
I don't think they're worried about terrorists so much. They're probably worried about the militias across the country.
Well, terrorists are probably using encrypted apps anyway to communicate. So, yeah. See,
so that's what I'm talking
Steve
about.
Said, cartels use crypto. So, yeah. So,
like somebody needs to check up on me and what I'm saying to make sure it's not wrong think. And I don't think a younger person's interested in that.
It probably
when they have the alternative of a highly encrypted mesh network that doesn't require them to go take a stupid test from a guy who looks like he drank a can of Fix-A-Flat, who wants to lecture them about life because he's been a licensee for 30 years, and that means he's
Jared's got
better than everybody else.
I think probably the concern is, maybe it is militias and homegrown stuff, and they don't want people talking encryptedly.
Okay, and we shouldn't have guns because think of the children. Why do you need a gun? Why do you want children to die? These are just bullshit excuses to clamp down on our freedoms. I don't buy it. I
don't think that direction's going to change.
And the funny answer to that is, if you want to use encryption, go get your own business class license, FCC license.
So then I have to lie and claim that I have a business. This is just dumb.
Right. Yeah, that is the.
So the regulatory burden of amateur radio is not keeping up with the needs and desires of.
You have to have an LLC to do it, and you can apply to get.
But you still have to have a compelling business license.
You can get an LLC from your state and never, even bring in a single dollar.
You don't have to have a compelling reason. You just have
Yes,
to be a
you do.
business.
I promise you do.
You have to be a business.
I can tell you
can
more
be
about this off air. They
have you
will
applied to
demand.
get one?
So they demand to know what your business is and why you would need any sort of spectrum allocated to you.
S Brown Outdoor says I can run encryption on my own business channel that gets licensed by the same federal agency. So why can't I do it on the one that I needed a test and license
Right.
for?
Yeah, you don't need to take a test for a commercial license, but you did go and prove that you have some level of floor knowledge by taking your amateur license, and you like registered all your personal information with them, which they then publish on the damned internet, which I can tell you younger folks are also not interested in having done. And so, yeah, it's of course that people are aging out of it, because the people who in the past, that was their very best option for backup communication, and they were willing to accept those compromises.
Well, I definitely think the social
The same compromises don't need to be made today.
ecosystem sustaining amateur radio, it does appear to be weaker. And I don't know. Are those the only reasons that you think that amateur radio is struggling to attract younger people, or do you think that there's other reasons? Because
Those are
everything
some
you
pretty
listed,
big reasons.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, those are all valid.
I think a lot of the people that get their license, they come on, they get on the air, they're automatically judged because they have a Baofeng and they don't have a $700 Kenwood or Yaesu radio handheld. And
so, do you think ham radio
You don't
then
wanna be
has
gear
an
shamed.
image? Is it an image problem, a cultural problem, or is it both?
I think it's all of the above.
I mean, that's got to be. I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth on this a lot because I hear the people, complaining about the culture, and I think we've all been a target of it at one time or another. I have, but I also think that that's just some people, and that it's relative. Like, there's the same personality types in firearms. Like, you could probably go to the range, your local range, and find some asshole that's like that.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that everyone in like the 2A world is. There's a lot of really cool people that will help you learn how to shoot. They don't care if you have a high point. They'll try and actually help you and share what they know. And then there's people that will shit on you for having a lesser firearm than they think you ought to have. Like, how many times have you heard the argument, well, I wouldn't carry that and, have my life rely on it. You would if it's the only fucking thing you've got.
Exactly.
Do you want to stand in front of it too?
Wouldn't want to be shot by it.
There's a lot of people that just have all these, opinions about this shit. And I don't think that they think them through totally. And you see that, like you said, Jared, with like the whole Baofeng thing. And it's actually had kind of the opposite effect on Baofengs. Had people not really focused so hard on them and degraded them so much. Denigrated. Thank you. Yeah. I've only had one thing of coffee, so I'm functioning on not all 8 cylinders, but yeah, I mean, they shit on them so much that I think it's almost like a cultural backlash kind of thing. Like, fuck you, I'm going to use it anyway.
Sure.
Even though there's other radios out there for the same price point that are probably better, But people have like pushed on it so hard and shit on them so much that it's almost become kind of a cultural thing, as kind of like a fuck you to amateur radio. I think it's like a sensitive issue.
my TYT radios are always my go-to. I mean, I have Baofengs.
Yeah, I do too.
But my TYTs are my go-to, especially for my TAC team and the SEER challenge. And I own 6 or 7 of them, and I pass them out.
Yeah,
They're-
I have I do the same thing. The 390 plus is the one that
Yeah.
I actually use the most. Everything else I've got, like my Kenwood and all that stuff, those sit on my desk in here. And I
Right.
fuck around with them, but that's the one that I take to the desert. That's the one that's on my pistol belt. That's the one that I take in my Jeep.
I carry two of them in my truck. One I have programmed with all the amateur stuff and my DMR stuff, and one's all
Well, it checks a lot of boxes. You can charge it through USB-C or charging cradle, and
and it's not just analog. It's the analog DMR. It has encryption. It has it all.
yeah, it's got a lot of bells and whistles, and once you learn to program them and learn the nuances, it's not so bad. But I don't know. I mean, there's people that will tell you that radio is junk too.
And there's people that'll tell you that Kenwood radio, your 75 whatever is junk.
Oh, the THD 75 whatever.
Yeah, whatever it is. And then
the battery on that radio does suck. I'll say that. I was actually just thinking that today because I use that one to monitor my own repeaters, and I was looking at them like the battery on this thing fucking sucks. Like the TYT, that battery lasts a very long time. That's a good battery on that thing, especially if you get the expanded one. But I don't know. I mean, with the whole discussion about older hams, dying off basically is what it is. How much institutional knowledge do you think is quietly disappearing as these older operators age out?
I think quite a bit of it's going to disappear, but it's going to be replaced with newer technology as time.
Or it'll just drive it to specialists, right?
Yeah.
Well, do you
Just be
think
specialized education rather than past hobby level knowledge passed on?
Well, do you think that the newer generations currently underestimate the importance of the technical self-reliance that comes with amateur radio?
But there's alternatives that don't require the same burden. So, like, what's the downside to them?
I don't know. Well, what do you think happens if
Or any of us?
What do you think if these people age out, basically die, take all of this tribal and institutional knowledge with them? Does amateur radio die? What happens, do you think?
I mean, we don't know how the pyramids were built either, so that's the way of the world. But in this case, I think it just drives it into the specialist territory, the radio tech that you pay the firm to come do this if you've had a need for that. Like the military still maintains their HFGCS system.
So it probably
I don't know. I don't know if they're
getting
getting that serviced by ham radio operators so much as like specialists who train in that. That's their education.
So you think that if it were to last, it wouldn't be because it evolved culturally enough to remain relevant long term. It would just be kind of I don't know.
Specialty knowledge that you go to school for, perhaps.
That would be weird.
I think there would be
decades down
enough
the line.
intermediate people like ourselves that could fumble our way through some of it,
Well, I mean,
pass on some of that information, and I don't know.
not to sound full of ourselves, but just the three of us alone collectively, not alone collectively, but collectively, the knowledge that we have about amateur radio is pretty solid, I think. And I try and be humble about that because, there's a lot of things that I don't know. And I'll straight up tell you if I don't. But the things that we are pretty good at, I mean, it'd be a shame if those things disappeared. There's a lot of guys that, like Kurt and people who've been around for a long time doing this stuff. It would really suck if that knowledge died with the person.
Yeah. I mean, or we could just, have a FCC that adapts to their regulatory framework, their overbearing regulatory framework to the changing times. And
so
avoid
do
that
you think
altogether.
that if they change some of their regulations that it would potentially survive?
Hell yes.
Like what?
Final answer. Like encryption. That's a great place to start. The fact that like reading through Part 97 takes a bachelor's degree. I mean, it's not really in. It's not written in a way for people to understand. It's written in like a gotcha type of manner, right?
The problem with
your employment policy at work. All right,
there was a movement in the
who's
90s.
that written for?
There was a movement in the 90s. I think Bill Clinton may have actually signed some sort of, I don't know if it was like an executive order or is legislation that they passed, but it was basically a plain English push. So instead of all this legalese, like you're talking about, all this complicated legal language, they would try and make things a little bit easier to understand going
Clear
forward.
language.
Yeah.
The
Just
way
plain,
humans
like a
talk
plain
to each other.
language movement. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, the legal framework in the ideas would still be there, but yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, there have been stuff that I've had to go research for videos, for instance.
You know,
that I had to look
I
through
think
Part
it's
97.
the-
I'm like, you got to read it a couple of times.
I think it would be like any other industry. When people die, a lot of their knowledge that they have goes with them.
True.
And you know, you can take the airline industry. You know, there's not too many people out there right now that know how to work on the old Fokker 100s airplanes. You know, those people were dying off. There's not too many people that know how to work on DC-3s and DC-10s anymore.
Right.
You know, there's a few that can do it.
I mean,
but it's
to be fair, this information isn't disappearing into the aether either. It's preserved in books. AI
Correct.
has studied those books and can
And in all
regurgitate
of the
that on
wonderful
command.
Reddit forums that we have available to us.
Sure, yeah. Written by people in between posting butthole photos and pictures of their feet. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess Reddit will be a great time capsule for that information.
You know, in the apocalyptic world, it would be the book of Eli. You know, then it would be all written in Braille, and it would be one copy of it.
One dude that can, tell you that you can't transmit on amateur radio if it's
encryption.
And everybody wants to kill him.
Can you imagine Denzel's character? Oh wait, hold on. It says here in the rules.
The
That was an
ID every
interesting
10
movie.
fucking minutes. I'm killing that guy.
You have to go to Alcatraz and swim across the bay to find this book and figure
It's
out
this
what the
totally
rule is.
apocalyptic world, and they're like following the rules. That'd be hilarious. That'd be a great parody, actually. You're not supposed to do that. We'll get in trouble. Yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end, and it's been an hour and a half. So this.
Jared's gonna have to pee again soon. Yeah, we might as well. Just
dude.
wrap this up.
Yep. Well, for the audience, some final questions. What originally attracted you to amateur radio or just communications in general? Do you think that ham radio is growing, declining, or transforming into something different? And I guess that's probably the end of it. I don't really have anything else to cover. We did good. Hour and a half is good enough. Jared, do you have anything that you would like to close out with?
I sent in the private chat the links to Jay from Prepared Citizens. I sent links to his website and to his YouTube channel.
Prepared
So if you
Citizens
I don't know
TG.
Yeah, TG Training Group, I think.
I will.
okay.
You want me to drop that in the comments?
Yeah, if you can drop that.
Send it.
All right, give me.
Oh, he's
one
got a
second.
YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
There's
subscribe to
one.
that. don't know if I
I've
can
never
do
met him
that.
in person, but he's a good dude. I've talked to him quite a bit. And he was just at a training event this weekend that I couldn't attend.
And I'll drop his YouTube channel too. Hang
Yeah.
on.
I think it's every Thursday night and maybe it's every Thursday morning and Tuesday night. He does a live stream. I might have that backwards.
So what all does he cover?
He does radio stuff. He sells radios, Baofengs, and does some programming.
Oh, cool.
And then he does a lot of medical type stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say it looked like he had kind of a medical sort of
Yes.
related logo in his. Let's see.
Is he an EMT or?
Yeah, there it is.
EMT or paramedic, I can't remember which.
Oh, it's a snake around an AR. All right.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. I didn't look at it.
The
closely
rifle
the
of
first
Hermes.
time. All right. Well, cool. Well, I posted the links for the YouTube and the website in the chat if anyone wants to check that out. Drew, how about you? You have a lot to say.
I'm all out. I done said it.
Next
I'm
time,
Drew.
so next one, I think you should be fishing.
I caught 2 fish. I'm basically an expert at catching 2 fish. I'm gonna go hack their guts out here after the stream. I run the Terminal Element channel, and it's basically a cry for help. I bumble through radio topics because I don't have old people to tell me what to do here. And yeah, just working on trying to communicate with my family in these grid down situations and maintain sanity through that, and not get caught up in all of the lore and romance that you'll hear about elsewhere. But you can come find me there.
We need to create our own book of Eli for amateur radio operators.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
I think Terrence did that, and he's about to do another one, right?
Yeah. The second one should be done in like September. So I hope.
Definitely need to include that imagery in your cover.
You know, it's
Denzel will be fine with it.
You need the cat in the background with a radio pack on. The hairless cat.
Love it.
So
Why a cat?
we're formatting and editing it right now. It's probably about the same volume as the first one, so I'm thinking it's going to be somewhere around 300 pages is my guess. A lot of citations, more than the first one. And you know what? It kind of discusses some of the lore. I did my very best to try and figure out what was real and what was BS. One of the questions that we always talk about internally is, you know, how are there any real examples that you can point to where amateur radio operators have actually helped out during a crisis or any kind of situation throughout history? And the answer is yes. And so I went through and I tried to find real ones, stuff that I could verify. I talked about some things that are kind of rumored to be true. And I also talked about how some amateur radio operators were embedded in certain emergency response agencies, basically. Okay. So like within like a sheriff's department, for instance. So I talked a little bit about that. So everything that I put in there is hopefully real, not bullshit. I tried to verify it as much as I could. But
it is so cool.
So it'll be out in September. I'll let you guys know. I'll drop a thing in the community page on my channel or whatever when I do. But I'm excited I even got to just kind of write a book and, you know, put one out. Boy, I've been wanting to for, you know, some time. But anyway, looks like we have 2 final comments, which I'll jump to, and then we'll wrap this up. S. Brown Outdoors, it looks like you might be responding to a question that I posed to the everyone in the chat, but a friend's dad was a ham radio operator and took me to a show where they had these Archie comic books about ham radio, and I got my license when I was 12. Very cool. Very cool. Let's see. My dad got me interested. Prepping motivated me to get better at it. Yeah. And ground fog, basically Bill Dance. All right. Well,
Outdoors
with that.
Guy? Bill Dance Outdoors. That sounds right.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up later. I can't remember a face.
Well, with that, thank you everyone for jumping on in the comment section. Appreciate you. we'll let you know when the next show is, and then we try and do these once a month, but everyone's very busy, so it gets a little bit difficult to wrangle the schedules of the three of us, so we do them when we can. And with that, I guess that's it. So talk to you all later, and I guess that's the end of the show.
See you, everybody.